Hello, and this is a Labour Lives interview, and I'm very lucky enough to be interviewing this afternoon, which is Wednesday the 11th of November, Cllr Anita Ward, and we're in Birmingham City Council in an office there. So, Cllr Ward, Labour Lives is about what it says, really, the background of the particular characters in the Labour Party in Birmingham, and I'm interested in speaking to them about their background, and I wonder if I could ask you something about your own personal background and your journey into the Labour Party.
Indeed, I am the only daughter of Pam and Phil, both of whom were trade unionists, and instilled in me, I believe, that because I was the only girl in the family, I have three brothers, that didn't stop me from achieving what I wanted to achieve in life. And they're both in their 80s now, and they believe that as much today as they did when they instilled that in me many, many years ago. I married quite young. Sadly, my first marriage broke up. I was living just outside London, returned to Birmingham, which is my home city, with my two children. I found myself homeless. I found myself needing help and support. That brought me into contact with my local Member of Parliament and with my local councillors. That built up a lifelong relationship with them, and I would say they are probably responsible for my being in the Labour Party and where I am now. I was housed on the Cllr Vale estate, which at the time, you're going back to the mid-80s now, was very much a run-down estate, in antisocial behaviour, a high crime rate. And I got together with some other mums on the estate because we wanted to make a difference to where we lived. I have to say I started off with a petition wanting a play area for my children. And say all of that brought me into contact with lifelong friends, and here I am now, all these years later.
Well, thank you for that. I think on looking basically on the internet and doing a bit of maths, that you had your children, as you say, quite young. I think you probably, from my calculations, must have been about 20.
Indeed.
Thank you. You have a son and a daughter.
I do.
And you have a son who is in the armed forces.
He is.
I've seen a brief interview with Lance Sergeant Vincent Hockley, who is your son, and he went into the armed forces, and I think in the interview he described travelling all over the world with the army, and of course he was injured as well in Afghanistan. I'm interested because we're talking today on the 11th of November, an important day to you because you are the council's armed forces champion, I believe. You, of course, are a former Lord Mayor of this city, the first citizen of Birmingham. You're somebody who sits on the Licensing and Public Protection Committee, I believe, also the Standards Committee.
Indeed.
And you sit at the present time on West Midlands Fire and Rescue Authority. So that journey that you described, I can only presume, was a journey that was helped along by the late lamented Robin Corbett. Would that be correct?
That is absolutely correct. I first met the late Robin Corbett, as he is now, because of my issues trying to do something for the local community. So that led to a lifelong friendship with Robin. It also led to my working for him for almost 20 years. He was very much a man that was passionate about people, and he was probably, apart from my parents, helped me form my views around the Labour Party. He was somebody that, as an employer, encouraged me very much to stand for council. And on the political stage, he's probably the person that I hold totally responsible for the journey that I've been on. I had the utmost regard for him when I worked for him. I had the utmost regard for him when he left politics and stood down in 2001, and of course went on to the House of Lords. He was somebody that tried to do a lot around the welfare of prisoners. That was something he was very passionate about. And was very much a genuine guy.
So we've got Anita Ward involved in politics when she comes back into Birmingham. She ends up working for Robin Corbett. In what capacity?
I started off working part-time for Robin as his caseworker. I went on to be his constituency manager.
Oh, goodness. Well, what we do know from the record is that you would be in your mid-30s when you decide to stand as a councillor.
Very much so. I stood first time for what was then Kingsbury Ward. It's now the Tyburn Ward, and I was beating that selection for some unknown reason. I still remember I was beat by one vote, so that's obviously marked me somewhere. So I wasn't successful then. I went on to be selected as the Labour candidate for what was then the Foxhollies Ward, and was sadly beaten. I came second there. That was in May 1995. I then stood for council again, and I was selected as the candidate for Hodge Hill for the May 1996 elections. Sadly, Councillor Eddie Rochford passed away towards the end of 1995, so there was a by-election in Hodge Hill. Because I'd already been selected for May 96, they asked me if I would stand as the by-election candidate. And as I've said previously, the rest is history. I am very, very much proud of the fact that I am the first woman ever elected to represent the Hodge Hill ward. I'm not the first woman selected to be the candidate, but I am the first woman elected to represent the Hodge Hill ward.
Can you remember your first contribution to the chamber?
Housing. It was definitely around housing, that much I remember. I had my colleague, Mike Nangle, who was affectionately, I used to call my little Irish leprechaun. Mike and I became great, great friends. Mike was very passionate around housing. He was heavily involved in housing, and particularly housing, urban renewal. And Mike had a passion that he wanted to achieve for the Bromford estate, the kind of things that were happening on Castle Vale. I don't know how well people know the Hodge Hill ward, but the only thing that effectively divides Castle Vale and the Bromford estate is Chester Road and the M6 going overhead. And Mike ran quite an active campaign to try to do things for the Bromford, and if memory serves me correctly, it's a long time ago now, I think my first contribution in the council chamber was around housing. I'm sure somewhere in the archives somebody will prove me wrong, but if memory serves me correctly, it was around housing. And that passion, continues today.
Now, lots of people have what they think is a knowledge about what councillors do. So tell Labour Lives the reality of what it was like in those early days, and has it changed over these, very nearly 20 years?
Certainly the role of a councillor has changed. I think the sad reflection of today's councillor, I accept that I've been very fortunate. I have worked for 3 members of Parliament, so that's Robin Corbett, Sean Simon and lastly Jack Dromey. I had 3 employers that understood local politics, and therefore I've been more fortunate perhaps than some. I had 3 employers that allowed me the time from work to take out an hour here or a couple of hours there to do my role to the best of my ability. I am very much conscious that other councillors have not had such a luxury, and they have found it difficult to balance work being a councillor. And I have to say, to an extent, home life as well. I think the demands upon councillors is much more now than it was when I first got on the council. I think the workload is heavy. I think the expectations are much more now, and I think the accountability is greater now. Now, I agree that the accountability should be greater. I think a lot of people don't really understand the role of councillor. If I have one passion or one thing I will hopefully achieve, and that is that politics is taught in schools. I do not mean party politics. Party politics should be way out of our schools. But I'm talking about citizenship. I just before you arrived this morning, I've taken a class of young children, primary school children, around the council house. They have never been to the council house. They don't know what councillors do. They don't know what happens in this building. And that is something we collectively should be changing, because if we want people to come into local politics and to make the differences that I think we should be making to the citizens of Birmingham, we have to start educating those young people about local governance and about citizenships. We can argue about party politics at a later stage. But more alarming to me is that some of the teachers there didn't know about local politics, about councillors and about this building, and that the work that goes on in here to keep the city running. So if adults don't know, how can we expect our younger people to know? And I think that is something collectively all of us that care about the future of this city have got to start addressing. You touched on earlier about my being Lord Mayor of Birmingham. We are in the 21st century, and I'm only the 7th woman ever to hold the role of Lord Mayor. No disrespect to my fellow male colleagues, but that's something we should be changing as well. We do have a society where it is now 50-50. I think I read somewhere recently that there may even be more women in society than men. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't keep making exceptions, but we have to do more to encourage women to come into politics. If we want politics to be representative of today's society, we have to start encouraging our young people to get involved and make that difference.
Whilst I don't want actual details, how does the process work in the Labour Party in terms of decision making? Let's say I'm Anita Ward and I want to push forward some particular policy within the party, and I want the City Council to adopt that. What's the process for people to understand how that works and how it then evolves?
Well, as an individual, you would not make policy, but you would take various issues. We have, again, much has been made in the press recently about our group executive. So we have what we call the Labour Group officers, and as I've said previously, that is your leader, your deputy leader, your group secretary, your chief whip, your assistant whip, and your vice chair / treasurer. You then have other non-functional posts. The Labour group has a women's officer. They should, and again, I'm not one of them now, so I'm talking about how things were, not about how they are, but group officers would meet regularly. Certainly as a chief whip, the chief whip should be taking back concerns that he or she is having raised with them. We then have the group executive, which is made up of other councillors. When I was first elected, the group executive was made up of group officers and then a certain number of backbenchers. And the Labour group would vote for who they wanted there, and I emphasise the word there, backbench representatives to be. Those backbench representatives were there effectively to be the voice of backbenchers and to challenge group officers. We've changed somewhat from that. We now have the cities broke up into districts. Each district nominates one person to be their representative on the group executive. So very much the group executive should be the sounding board. We then have group meetings, and that is an opportunity for councillors, whatever role they hold within the group, to challenge and to raise issues. From there, we should be formulating policy. And can I say, by way of the group, and I'm not sure why this has fallen off the radar, but certainly when I was first elected, and for a number of years, each constituency Labour Party was allowed to send a group observer, and they were the link between the group and the wider party within Birmingham. And I have raised a fair bit recently, and it's something I'm concerned about, that we have become very inward looking. Councillors report back, but my interpretation of something may not be your interpretation of something. So I am keen, once the new leader is established and we start moving things forward, that those CLP observers should start coming back to group meetings. Because it could be a group secretary, it could be a CLP secretary, it could be somebody that the constituency Labour Party has nominated to be their observer, because I think it's important that engagement is there as well.
And that's all part of the transparency, obviously, from your point of view.
Absolutely. Not only do we need to be transparent as the ruling Labour Party to the citizens of Birmingham, but people need to realise that as councillors we hold various different roles. We represent the individuals within our wards. We are here to effectively enforce laws, regulations. But, I am a Labour councillor, so I'm here to represent the Labour Party. And therefore it's important that the Labour Party know what I am doing as a Labour representative.
Quite a difficult role, though, isn't it? Because, yes, you are a Labour Party member and a representative of the Labour Party, but also you have another hat on, don't you, really, which is to represent those people that elected you or didn't elect you.
Indeed. Birmingham has some of the biggest wards in Europe, although boundary changes, which is a different issue, will reduce that. But if you look at the number of electors I have, compared to the number of people that turn out to vote, percentage-wise, it's quite small. But I am elected a Hodge Hill councillor. I'm not elected to represent only those that came out to the ballot box. I am there to represent everybody. What I will say to people, though, is I stand on a Labour manifesto. And therefore, those that come out and vote for me, if I'm doing my job properly as a councillor, will know what I stand for. at the end of the day. But you cannot turn somebody away just because they don't agree with you on your politics. You cannot turn them away because they're not in the electoral roll. You cannot turn them away because you like pink Smarties and they like blue Smarties. You are there to represent, within reason, everybody within your community. There are issues that I cannot help people with, and I have to tell them that if it's something before the courts, I cannot intervene or interfere in any way. There are also other things that it is sometimes better for them to go and see a Member of Parliament about, and I think it's important that I am honest with them and say, I cannot help you with that, however your Member of Parliament can, and I will refer you to the Member of Parliament. I think sometimes as councillors, and again it takes me back to an answer I gave you earlier on, is sometimes we believe we're all things to all people, and we have to be big enough to say we're not, because otherwise we build up people's expectations of us, and if then you cannot deliver, they will disengage with you. And the important thing for me is making sure that my constituents engage with me.
How do Labour councillors drive up more engagement in terms of how do we get more people involved in voting in local elections, engaging in local politics?
I would say being seen, not appearing every 4 years, and then expecting to come out, people to come out and to vote for you. But most importantly, and again it goes back to something I've said earlier, is reinforcing our role within the community. People will come out for something if they know what they're coming out for. If you don't engage with them, why should they engage with you? Now that is often easier said than done. I'm sure somewhere during this interview we will get on to the delightful government cuts. The resources a councillor has now is a lot less than a councillor had when I was first elected. That does make communicating with the electorate a lot more difficult. When I say resource, I do not mean financial resource. I'm on about some of the community buildings that used to be open so we could hold various meetings there that no longer are. Some of our schools would open up to the community because of their financial burden. Now it's difficult for them because they have to pay caretakers and everything else. We used to have a resource where we could hold advice bureaus every day of the week if we wanted to, but because of the financial burden on us to pay for things now, that's fallen back.
Birmingham's a big city. It's got diverse communities right across the city. And what some people think is it's almost ungovernable because of the nature of, say, the demographic that is in the inner city compared to, say, out in Northfield, for instance. It's a totally different group of people who've got a totally different set of needs. And I'm just wondering how you square that, because when you come to council, when you come to Labour group, there will be people who will be involved in, for want of a better word, pork barrel politics. They want something for, I just use this as an example, Northfield, or they want something for Hodge Hill, or they think the inner cities is where the money should be going into, of greater deprivation. So those must create some interesting tensions within the Labour group.
It does, and certainly has over the years, but if I go back to where you started off, I think Birmingham's size has become an excuse for some of the things that are going wrong. We need to be more joined up, and sadly ward boundaries, although they're only on a piece of paper, they do build up barriers. I if I take my own ward, the M6 motorway effectively splits me from 2 adjoining wards, in fact possibly 3. But some of the issues that my constituents have are probably being experienced in those adjacent wards. And if my partner in an adjacent ward comes up with something, a solution to an issue, just because that's a Tory councillor, why shouldn't I say, that's a good idea, actually, we could do some joined up work there. We are very parochial. I happen to believe that Hodge Hill's the best ward in the city, and I happen to believe that I've got the best constituents in the city. And my husband is a councillor in the adjacent ward, and I'm pretty sure he'd say the same thing there, and it will lead to family disputes. We have to start looking at our neighbourhoods, we have to look at our wider ward, we then have to look at our districts, and we have to look at the city. If I've got one issue that, and again, this is not laid at the door of any particular administration during my 20 years, but we all talk devolution. What is devolution? Because if I go and use that word to my constituents, the first thing they're going to say to me is, what does that mean for my house, my street, my neighbourhood, my children's school? We as politicians have to stop talking the talk and effectively, and pardon the pun, start walking the walk. If devolution is going to mean anything, we need to start first and foremost, understanding it ourselves. We need to start explaining it, or we need to start saying to people, the council itself cannot do this. We do have the approach that, well, we're the council, we're the best, we're the biggest council, we're the best. If one of the other agencies we work with can do it as well, do it better, why shouldn't we engage with them doing it? I've got a very proactive HLB in Hodge Hill. It's
HLB?
Sorry, Housing Liaison Board. I'm using abbreviations and I shouldn't. I've got a proactive Housing Liaison Board in Hodge Hill. They want to make a difference to where they live. Why shouldn't I be working with them instead of saying to them, well, I'm the councillor, I can do that better than you? People do care about where they live, and sometimes it's not money people need, it's the mechanisms to do something.
Have we spent too much money on the city centre as opposed to the wards? Because we've had massive amounts of money pumped into the centre, and effectively some would say that's happened really since just before Sir Albert became leader. I mean, there was a tension in the Labour Party. I mean, I don't think it's wrong to say that Councillor Teresa Stewart, when she was leader, believed that more money should be spent on education within the city and less on prestige projects. Where do you stand on all that?
Again, a politician's answer. I probably agree with both arguments, but I think we have to start bearing in mind that some of the money that came into the city to do some of these projects came in from the European Development Fund. You could only use that money on some of these projects. You couldn't take that money and spend it on education. Somebody that I've already said I went back to education. I believe passionately in education. But Birmingham was changing a lot. We had gone from a manufacturing city, and we had to develop something that would update us. A lot of the decisions over some of these projects, although some of the building work has taken place during my time as a councillor, a lot of the decisions were taken before I was a councillor. If you look at some of the business that now comes into this city because of those projects, where would Birmingham be economically without some of those projects? Were they Were some of those projects at the cost of other things? Undoubtedly so, but a lot of people in this city have got jobs within some of these projects. So for me, it's keeping that balance. I mean, I've been here for 20 years, and this is probably the most interesting leadership election that I've experienced. I think the issue for me is and I know all 5 candidates really well. I'm flattered that Penny sees me as her mentor. I take full responsibility for Penny being a councillor, and we've been good friends over many years. Mike Leddy, of course, I've known, and Mike has been a chief whip like myself. John, I've served with for in Hodge Hill, and I've known on the council. Ian is a neighbouring councillor, so we're in the same district. Of course, I remember him in his rebel days. And then Barry Henley, who is a very eloquent speaker. So each and every one of them bring different qualities. I did say to a colleague yesterday, in an ideal world, I would take each of their individual qualities, mould it into, and we'd have an ideal leader. We don't have that luxury. Some tough decisions are going to have to be made. People will pick up votes from people they consider friends. They will pick up votes from others that like what they say on the night. For me personally, I think there has to be a realisation that the Labour group cannot afford to navel gaze. It can certainly not afford to try to point score, and it's against particular candidates. And we certainly need to pick a leader that can hit the ground running. I understand from last week's letter from the chair of the improvement panel that he will expect to see the leader almost immediately, and will be reporting back to the Secretary of State. We have to get it right, and if we don't, we will get it wrong for Birmingham at the end of the day. And before you ask me who am I going to vote for at this moment in time, I can genuinely say I don't know. I am still listening to people.
Thank you. Could I ask you about the technicalities of running a city like this? We have, at the moment, a cabinet system that was brought in by government legislation, which allowed us to have a cabinet of 10. And all those places have now been filled, and we have 10 cabinet members. Where do you stand on the idea of going back to the committee structures and having chairs of committees?
Again, it is no hidden secret. I have been an opposer of the cabinet system since it was introduced. I genuinely believe that and I'm not saying the committee system was perfect, it had its flaws, but the chairmen were selected by a wider group of people. I have a real issue with anything that comes under the patronage of one individual, and again, that is regardless of who that individual is. I also don't believe that the current cabinet system allows for a wider engagement and wider input into the policies of the council, and I think that's something that councillors across all the political divide agree on.
I very much enjoy reading the Chamberlain Files. Perhaps politicians in Birmingham don't, and I tend to think it's extremely well written, and it seems to have some good sources. You were described in the Chamberlain Files as one of the big beasts in the City Council, and it was a reference to May 2006, which you've alluded to earlier, when you lost your chairmanship. How did you feel when you lost?
It was earlier this year.
Not 2016, 2015, sorry.
In all honesty, if it hadn't have been this year, it would have been next year. We went from 8 scrutiny chairs down to 5, and the proposal, I don't know whether any new leader will see this through, but the proposal is that next year there are 3.
The reason I put you in the big beast class is because, of course, neither Councillor Mohammed Afzal was found a position, nor Councillor Carl Rice. Both seem to be Borite supporters, and to use the patronage point, people who delivered votes for Sir Albert over a number of years. Do you want to comment?
I'm not sure if you're reading more into that than maybe they should. Look, as is always the way, there's been lots of rumours, lots of speculations, starting from the fact that because I was a supporter of Sir Albert, because there were deals done to make sure that people got other positions. I've heard the rumour is because I delivered on a scrutiny report that upset certain people. We could sit here forever and a day and speculate. What is done, and as I said to you...
And the report you might be alluding to is the child sexual exploitation. I was in the chamber when you gave that at full council and read the report. Made harrowing reading.
Taking the evidence was very harrowing. It's probably one of the most difficult inquiries I've taken part in. Now, I know it was difficult for some of my colleagues. It was an issue we had to be adult about and discuss. If the price I've paid for doing that inquiry and delivering that report is losing my chairmanship, I have to say losing my chairmanship was worth it.
Thank you for that. Could I ask you not about the leadership, and you'll be extremely pleased that I will move from that topic. Can I move to the fact that you've alluded to the fact that you were the only seventh woman to be the Lord Mayor of this great city. And you said in a quote, I think, that was in the Birmingham Post, "I must not let the city down." What did you mean by that?
I think being this city's first citizen is probably something that you could never dream of doing. It is something that I was overwhelmed to do. But as their first citizen, it's about them at the end of the day. I had a fantastic year. I live on the north of the city. Again, we spoke earlier about the city centre, and that's if I have two criticisms of this city, can I say it is my city. I'm Birmingham born and bred, as the accent will tell everybody. We do not sing our own praises enough, and that is certainly something I found out during my year. But I spoke earlier about artificial barriers. If you live on the north of the city, you do not go to the south of the city. You come to the city centre, you might go as far as Cadbury's in Bourneville, but that's probably as far as you get. And it's probably the same for those that live on the south of the city. I spent a year meeting some really, really fantastic Brummies. They are a credit to this city. And I went to some parts of Birmingham I've never ever been to in my life, and I will live on that year for the rest of my life. I was the youngest female Lord Mayor. Councillor Portilsley claims being the youngest ever Lord Mayor, although I think there is some dispute between he and Councillor Shafiq Shah over that title. But that gave me an opportunity, I think, to do things that I'd go and play football. I'd go and I spent a year letting as many young people in this city as possible trying on the chain of office. I'm passionate that it is their chain of office. I will live on that for forever. I'm very, very much though determined to see more women hold that role.
Will you be nominating a woman? How does it work in terms of how the Lord Mayor comes about? Explain to us that.
Okay, so it's done very much on a proportionality basis. So the party that has the biggest number of councillors will can, depending on the number they have, get it 2 years on a trade. It's very, very complicated. If you can do the maths, you'll work it out. If I explain the way in which it worked for my year and what will happen now. So again, it's self-nomination to your group. Your group then vote.
Did somebody come and say to you, what do you think, Anita Ward? Do you think you should be Lord Mayor, or did you just think, hold it, I quite fancy being Lord Mayor?
Probably a combination of the two. People had been talking about who... the role of Lord Mayor is effectively bestowed upon an individual for their service to the city. Though I've only been here 20 years, and there are people that have been here longer than I am one of the longest serving councillors now that has not held the title of Lord Mayor. There's Councillor Sybil Spence that has been here longer than I, but she's already held the role of Lord Mayor. So there's a combination of people saying, you've been here a long time, you've done this, you've done that, you should think about standing. Coupled with my determination and say I'm not anti-male by any stretch of the imagination, but it had been a long time since a woman had had the role of Lord Mayor. I think it had been 10 years. And I genuinely believed that it was time that another woman had the title. Again, because of the diversity within the city and the growing number of women within our population. I went home, I was having a conversation with my daughter, who just looked at me and said, stop moaning about it and go and do something about it. So I had a pep talk from my daughter. I then spoke to other people and asked them if they would be prepared to support me if I put my name forward. Although I wasn't 100% sure, I got a sense of feeling that there was no real objection to my doing it, so I put my name forward. The Labour group then met. I think there were 4, maybe 5 potential candidates that night. There was a vote and I was the Labour group's nominee. Your name then has to go to full council, and it's down to the council to vote for you to be, because again you are their Lord Mayor.
There was a lovely interview on the internet with some very young people who came to interview you, and you were Lord Mayor in the Lord Mayor's parlour. And you talked about the number of engagements that you had, and I think you said that there was some 1,500 engagements, approximately, could be in a year. You were averaging 4 a day, but there might have been days when you did 7 or 8. Mm-hmm. How did you fit all that in with other roles that you held, and also being a councillor? Do you get an office and a support team? How does it work? What's the mechanics?
Yeah, you do. You have a very, very nice office. I have to say it's probably the nicest office in the council house. You have a restroom. A lot of people don't realise that the Lord Mayor has a bedroom, which you don't stay here now overnight. But of course, people have to remember, when the building was created, and the transport then. So I'm pretty sure that Lord Mayors over the years have stayed here. But of course now with modern vehicles, it's 10 minutes down the road to get home.
In the Lord Mayor's car?
In the Lord Mayor's car, Lom 1.
Lom 1, indeed.
And
what was it like to get in Lom 1 as the first time being the Lord Mayor of Birmingham?
Well, of course, the first time you come in, you don't come in Lom 1. Because you are Lord Mayor designate, so you are the day that you are created Lord Mayor is called Mayor making. So on the afternoon of the mayor making, it is in fact the Deputy Lord Mayor's car that comes to collect you, because you are not Lord Mayor. But when you go home on the evening, because you go home in Long One, my neighbours, my immediate neighbours knew what was happening because they were here on the day, but other neighbours weren't. And of course, they saw this big Jaguar turn up outside the house, and it's got the city crest on either side, and
flag on the bonnet?
No, we're not.
You can't have a flag on the
bonnet. No, because of health and safety.
Oh.
We are not allowed to, which is why they are on the side of the doors now. My first engagement, I had to come out of my house wearing the full Lord Mayor's robes, and I come out of the house and I've got these black and gold robes on and this big hat that looks like a big pirate's hat, and my neighbours were just, for those that obviously can't see the faces that I'm pulling, they were aghast, what on earth is going on? And then somebody started to shout, hello Lord Mayor, hello Lord Mayor. The funniest thing is one of the first public engagements you do is the Lord Mayor's show, which is very, very complicated, because although it's called the Lord Mayor's show, it is actually for the benefit of the outgoing Lord Mayor, and all the money raised on the day goes to the outgoing Lord Mayor's charities. So my son was on leave from the army. He brought my grandchildren into the council house, and I'm standing at the top of the stairs, and my granddaughter, who must have been just coming up to 4 at the time, looked me up and down and just went, Nanny, what are you wearing? Trying to explain to a 4-year-old what a Lord Mayor is and everything else, and she just looked at me, well, you look like a pirate to me. And I've lived on the fact that my grandchildren thought I was a pirate for 12 months. I very much tried to make it a family year. My grandchildren and I used to play hide and seek under the Lord Mayor's dining table, and run around the council house in pitch black, and so hopefully they have as many happy memories of my year as I have.
From the interviews, I see that you nominated as one of your charities the Royal British Legion, which was at that time celebrating its 90th anniversary. Is that right?
That is right.
And am I right in thinking that you're also chair of the Royal British Legion in Birmingham?
I am. One of the roles of Lord Mayor during your year is you are president of Birmingham County Royal British Legion. For those that don't know, I am the daughter of a soldier. I am a mum of a soldier. It's actually 5 years ago next week that my son was injured in Afghanistan. Very much supporter of the armed forces. We were talking about Iraq earlier. I think I am of the view that people need to realise that a soldier doesn't decide where a soldier serves. A soldier puts on a uniform to serve his country, and it's the politicians that decide where soldiers go. You can have as much criticism of the Prime Minister and the Cabinet and members of Parliament. I will not have a soldier criticised for where he or she goes and serves. The Royal British Legion, troop aid, the Queen Elizabeth Hospital when my son was badly injured, probably got him back on his feet. When I became Lord Mayor, I felt that I wanted to give something back to the organisations that looked after my son and looked after a lot of the other serving men and women. So I raised money for the Queen Elizabeth charity, and that was to go towards Fisher House. That is a facility out at the QE for the families. I was very...
So that families can stay and visit their sick relatives who are in the hospital.
Yeah, we were very, very fortunate as as a Birmingham family that my son was in a Birmingham hospital. We were able to go home of a night time. We were able to switch off. And, you know, I was conscious that one of the young men that was injured with my son was from Southern Ireland. And, you know, his family were flown over here and they were in a bed and breakfast for quite a number of weeks. And they, you know, they weren't able to switch off the way in which we were. So I was determined that I would give something back. So I raised money for there. I raised money for my son's regimental charity.
The Irish Guards?
The Irish Guard as well.
I also noticed that you also raised some money for the Tiny Babies Big Appeal for premature babies, because you mentioned that both of your children had been born premature. Is that right?
That is absolutely right. My daughter was a twin. Sadly, I lost the twin, but my daughter survived, but then was born 13 weeks early. She weighed in a very, very tiny 2.5 pounds, had a problem with the heart, has hearing problems, and then my son, lazy family planning, I admit, my son arrived just under 12 months later, and he was born premature as well. Didn't have the same health issues as that.
So, what's the future for Cllr Anita Ward? What's on your quotes bucket list that you'd like to do in terms of being either a counsellor, an individual? I mean, you've got 2 children, you've got 4 grandchildren, another one expected in May 2016. You're obviously clearly enormously proud of your children, you and your grandchildren. Yeah. You've got a good relationship, your husband is supportive. During the term that you were the Lord Mayor, I think you became Chancellor of Birmingham City University. Is that what roles would you like to take on? I mean, you were a big beast in the terms of the politics. You did hold this chairmanship for 3 years, a very difficult role. You were the chief whip, pretty difficult to keep sometimes people under control. Chief whips also used to, certainly in Parliament, you know, have an individual black book where they keep things in there. You had to know about all the secrets of things that were going on. What is Anita Ward going to be doing in the next, say, 5 years?
To address your little black book, a chief whip for 9 years certainly knows where the skeletons are, where the bodies are buried. But when you become chief whip, you take on confidentiality as well. There's real omerta then. Silence. Yes. There will be no memoirs from this former chief whip. Where do I see myself? Well, the first hurdle I have to get through is a selection for next year's elections, and that process may well be interesting. And let's leave it at that. I then have, if I am successful, I need to get through an election. I have said to each of the to those candidates that have spoke to me that they will have as much loyalty from me as Sir Albert has had. This is about the city. It is not about us, and whatever our views are, somebody on the 23rd of November will be democratically elected. It's no hidden secret that Jeremy Corbyn was not my choice of leader for the party, but he's been democratically elected under party rules, and he will have my support, as will the leader of Birmingham City Council. If I can serve in any way, I will serve, but my ambition remains almost 20 years on, the same as it did all those years ago, and that is to make a difference to Birmingham. And if I can put my head on my pillow when I finally go for my long sleep and say, yep, you've done that, I've achieved what I've set out to achieve. And you don't have to hold office to do that. So that's my future. And loving each and every one of my grandchildren.